Welcome to my channel. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe and like. On a frigid winter night, when the stars above seemed to blaze brighter than ever, a streak of radiant light tore through the darkness, plummeting into the dense forest surrounding Elias Carver's remote valley. The sound was a fierce cosmic symphony, roaring, screeching, then fading into silence. Elias, a recluse living among ancient trees, didn't hear it. He sat by the fireplace in his small wooden cabin, the crackling flames his only companion in the solitary life he'd chosen. But as he rose, preparing for a short walk under the moonlight to shake off the weight of his thoughts, he had no idea that fate awaited him, a fate beyond anything he could have imagined. Stepping outside, Elias's heavy boots crunched through the dry leaves, his breath forming faint white clouds in the biting air. The night sky held an eerie hue, as if the stars pulsed with an unnatural rhythm. Then, in the distance, a figure emerged, fragile, trembling, unmistakably not of Earth. This is a tale of a destined encounter, where humanity confronts the mysteries of the universe, where compassion triumphs over fear, and where mankind proves once again that it is an unquenchable flame amidst the endless dark. Elias Carver, 38, bore the weathered look of a man who'd turned his back on the modern world in search of stillness. Once an aerospace engineer at a major corporation, he'd spent his youth sketching dreams of the stars, designing ships to pierce the atmosphere. But after an unspoken tragedy, a failed test flight that claimed the life of a colleague, Elias had walked away from it all. He chose this dense forest, 40 miles from the nearest town, to live unbound by expectations or city lights. His wooden cabin, modest and rough-hewn, nestled among towering oaks, its walls cloaked in green moss, its gray shingles faded by time. Inside, the furnishings were stark: a threadbare sofa with torn fabric, a small wooden table scarred from spilled coffee, and a modest fireplace flickering with the only warmth in the endless winter nights. That night, Elias rose from his armchair, his calloused hands rubbing together for warmth. He pulled on a thick wool coat, its fabric worn pale by years of use, and tugged an old cap over his black hair streaked with silver. Night walks were his ritual, a way to quiet the restless thoughts, letting the rustle of leaves beneath his feet drown out memories he refused to face. As he stepped outside, the cold enveloped him, seeping through his coat to prickle his rough skin. His breath curled into thin white wisps, dissolving in the icy air. The night sky stretched before him, a tapestry of twinkling stars, the full moon casting a silver glow over the treetops. Yet something felt off. A heavy stillness gripped the forest, as if every creature held its breath, awaiting an unseen event. Elias tread his familiar path, his old leather boots snapping dry leaves with crisp echoes in the silence. He inhaled deeply, the cold air filling his lungs with the damp scent of earth and faint pine resin from the ancient trees. His gaze drifted across the massive oaks, their gnarled branches reaching skyward like bony fingers. Then, amidst the tranquil dark, a faint glow caught his eye, a hazy streak flickering in the distance, threading through the thick foliage. He frowned, dismissing it as moonlight reflecting off a puddle or a trick of his tired eyes after a long day at the woodshop. But as he drew closer, an odd sensation stirred in his chest, an unnamed instinct whispering that something awaited him ahead. He approached cautiously, each step deliberate, his hand unconsciously gripping the edge of his coat. The crunch of leaves became a steady rhythm, blending with the thudding of his heart. Reaching a small clearing among the oaks, he froze. A figure appeared in his sight, slight, fragile, curled beneath the largest oak in the forest. Squinting in the dim moonlight, Elias first thought it a wounded animal, a fawn separated from its mother, or a fox exhausted by the cold. But its form was too strange, too still, lacking the natural twitching of a creature in distress. His pulse quickened, adrenaline surging, his hands trembling faintly. Taking a deep breath to steady himself, Elias edged forward, pushing aside dense branches. Dry leaves scraped his skin, leaving a rough sensation. Just a few steps away, he stopped, his breath catching. Before him was no animal, but a girl, or something resembling one. Her body shivered uncontrollably, as if the winter night were draining her life away. Long silver hair cascaded over her shoulders like a luminous stream, each strand glinting under the moon, reflecting ethereal light as if woven from fallen stardust. Her skin, a pale violet, seemed to glow faintly, adorned with intricate, shimmering patterns, delicate lines pulsing with a mysterious rhythm, like a living map of an alien sky. A tattered cloak clung to her frail frame, its thin fabric nearly transparent, useless against the biting cold. Elias stepped back, instinct screaming. This was no human. This was beyond his understanding, a being from the stars he'd once dreamed of in his engineering days. Then he saw the wound. A deep gash marred her side, hidden beneath the torn cloak, at least 8 inches long, its edges raw and jagged as if carved by something sharp and brutal. A thick, silvery liquid oozed slowly from it, shimmering like mercury in the moonlight, not red like blood, but a radiant silver that danced with otherworldly light. Her breaths were shallow, uneven, each one a weak wheeze, as if she clung to life with her last strength. Elias stood rooted, torn between reason and emotion. Part of him urged retreat, to run back to his cabin, lock the door, and leave this alien creature to its fate. This wasn't his burden, he was no hero, no savior. But then his eyes fell on her small, trembling hands clutching the wound, and a memory surged forth. His colleague, lifeless amid the wreckage of a test ship, pleading eyes he couldn't answer. He clenched his jaw, old pain cutting anew. "Are you okay?" His voice rasped, breaking the silence, slicing through the wind's whistle among the trees. Her eyes snapped open, blazing like twin pools of molten silver, radiating pure terror. They weren't human, no pupils, just a luminous expanse, deep and enigmatic, as if holding an entire galaxy within. She shrank back, pressing against the oak, its rough bark scraping her glowing skin as if she wished to melt into it. Elias raised a hand slowly, palm open to signal no harm, though it trembled with a mix of worry and awe. "I won't hurt you," he said, softer, voice quivering. "But you don't look okay." She gasped, her silver eyes darting as if assessing her escape. Elias glanced at her bare feet, small and shoeless, caked with mud and scratches. He wondered how far she'd come, from where, and how she'd ended up here in this remote forest. A crashed ship? A portal? He had no answers, but he knew one thing: if she stayed out here with that wound, the cold and blood loss, or whatever flowed through her, would claim her before dawn. The wind gusted harder, swirling dry leaves around them, and she shuddered violently, her tiny hands clutching the wound tighter, silver liquid seeping through her fingers, dripping to the ground in glistening beads. "You need help," Elias said, his voice firm despite the doubt gnawing at him. "If you stay here, you'll die." He took a step forward, boots squelching faintly in the soft earth. She didn't respond, her eyes fixed on him, brimming with fear and suspicion, like a cornered animal. Leaning closer, Elias made a swift decision, his tone resolute. "My house is nearby. I have medicine, food. Come with me, I'll help you." A tense silence stretched, the wind's howl a dramatic backdrop. Then, in the moon's hazy glow, she nodded faintly, a gesture so slight it was nearly imperceptible, yet enough for Elias to know he'd crossed the first threshold between human and unknown, between fear and compassion. Elias led Lira through the forest, the path to his cabin stretching longer in the thick darkness. Towering oaks blotted out the moonlight, leaving only speckled patches of light scattered across the ground like shattered glass. His boots crunched over dry leaves, the sound mingling with the wind's eerie whistle through the branches, crafting a haunting, monotonous melody. Lira followed a few steps behind, her fragile form nearly blending into the shadows save for her shimmering silver hair and faintly glowing violet skin. She said nothing, her movements slow and frail, each barefoot step squishing softly in the dew-soaked earth. Elias glanced back, her silver eyes scanning everything, the rugged trunks, swaying branches, and him, like a being awakening in an alien world, torn between fear and curiosity. He caught her as she stumbled, his hand brushing her slender arm. Her skin was icy, not the cold of a human but a frost from a place devoid of warmth, yet beneath it, he felt a faint pulse, not a heartbeat, but a strange energy coursing through her. A shiver ran through him, not from the chill but from the realization he touched something unearthly. Careful, he muttered hoarsely, releasing her as she steadied herself. She didn't react, only nodded slightly, her silver eyes flickering with something, gratitude or suspicion, he couldn't tell. Reaching the cabin, Elias pushed open the weather door, its hinges screeching in the stillness. Warmth spilled out from the fireplace, carrying the scent of burning wood and faint pine resin, banishing the night's bite. The golden-orange glow danced across the wooden walls, casting shadows on the scarred planks. He stepped inside, turning to Lira. She stood at the threshold, bare feet muddy on the wooden step, her eyes sweeping the room with a wary vigilance. He saw her hesitate, her small hands clutching the torn cloak as if anchoring herself to something familiar. "Come in," he said, his voice gentle but firm, pointing to the worn sofa near the fire. "Sit there." Lira lingered, her silver eyes flicking between him and the sofa as if it were a cunning trap. After a long pause, she crossed the threshold, her steps tentative, leaving faint mud prints on the floor. She perched on the sofa's edge, body rigid, hands still gripping her cloak, back straight as a taut string. Elias watched her, noting the tension in her every line. She wasn't at ease, didn't trust, but she was here, risking survival over isolation. He turned to a corner cabinet, pulling out a scratched metal first aid kit, its edges worn from careless drops. Kneeling before her, he set it down with a dull clank. "I need to treat your wound," he said, meeting her gaze. "Okay?" Her silver eyes locked onto his, fathomless and unreadable, like twin lakes reflecting firelight without revealing their depths. After a stretched silence, she nodded faintly, a gesture he nearly missed. Elias carefully peeled back the torn fabric from her side, moving slowly to avoid startling her. The wound was worse than he'd thought, a deep, ragged gash, its edges torn, silver liquid seeping out, gleaming like molten metal under the firelight. He frowned, unsure what it was, blood, or something entirely alien? "This might sting," he warned, soaking a clean cloth with alcohol. As he pressed it to the wound, Lira flinched, her hands digging into the sofa's frayed fabric, fingers clawing until he heard it tear faintly. Yet she didn't cry out, didn't whimper, only bit down, on what might be lips on her strange face, and endured in silence. Elias worked swiftly, cleaning and bandaging it with white gauze, his motions precise like an engineer assembling parts, though a mix of unease and wonder stirred within him at the being before him. Finished, he sat back on his heels, wiping his hands on his coat and studying her. Her silence unnerved him. No groans, no thanks, just those silver eyes tracking his every move as if dissecting him. "Can you speak?" he asked, curiosity tinging his voice, fingers tapping his knee to mask his awkwardness. She blinked, her eyes shimmering like gems melted by the fire. Then, for the first time, she spoke, her voice soft and melodic, like wind echoing from a distant cave. "Lira." Elias frowned, repeating hesitantly. "Lira?" She nodded slowly, firmly, her name, or the closest thing to one he could grasp. He tested it again. "Lira." The word foreign on his tongue, like a phrase from a lost language, yet it held a strange, almost surreal beauty. "I'm Elias," he said, tapping his chest, his voice rough from months of speaking only to himself. "You're not human, are you?" Half question, half statement, seeking confirmation of what he knew. Lira tilted her head, silver hair spilling over her shoulders, her eyes glowing like twin moons in the firelight. "You, human?" Her voice faltered, each word an effort to mimic him, laced with an unearthly tone. Elias exhaled, nodding slightly. "Yeah, I'm human." He watched her, seeing her slender shoulders relax just a fraction, as if his admission were a fragile thread pulling her from fear's abyss. That night, Elias didn't sleep. He sat in the armchair across from the sofa, hands clasped, eyes fixed on Lira. She curled up in the wool blanket he'd given her, an old gray-green one riddled with holes, her silver eyes closed but her hands still clutching the tattered cloak like a final shield. Firelight bathed her face, highlighting the pulsing patterns on her violet skin, slowing now, matching her breaths, as if she were stabilizing after the nightmare that brought her here. Elias wondered what he'd done, taken in an injured alien, trusted her with nothing but a name and eyes holding a universe. He wasn't a hero, never wanted to be. Yet watching her, something stirred, a faint spark of compassion he thought had died in the ashes of his past. Sighing, he leaned back, the fire's crackle lulling him into a haze between wakefulness and dreams, while Lira, a being from the stars, lay there, beginning her journey into his world. The days following their moonlit meeting passed in a strange silence, as if Elias and Lira were testing the boundaries of their shared existence. The small cabin, once accustomed only to a lone man's steady breathing and the fire's crackle, now carried the presence of an extraterrestrial. Elias woke each morning to an unreal sensation, sunlight filtering through the window's slits, spilling onto the scratched wooden floor, and Lira, her silver hair glinting like morning dew, sitting on the sofa or standing by the window, silver eyes locked on the world outside. She spoke little, but when she did, her melodic voice drifted through the cramped space like an alien breeze, stirring both curiosity and unease in Elias. The morning after her arrival, Elias stirred as pale golden light streamed from the eastern window, warming his face through the threadbare curtain. Rubbing his eyes, his shoulders ached from dozing in the armchair, and he glanced at the sofa. Lira was already awake, standing by the window, bare feet on the cold floor, her small hand pressed to the glass as if reaching for the light. Her hair shimmered in the sun, silver strands refracting a faint rainbow, her violet skin almost translucent, revealing pulsing patterns like a sleeping creature's breath. Elias sat up, the chair creaking. "Never seen a sunrise?" he asked, voice rough with sleep, rubbing his stiff neck. Lira didn't turn immediately, her silver eyes fixed on the horizon where the sun gilded the distant oaks. After a long pause, she whispered, "Not like this." Her voice was soft, tinged with a distant note, as if recalling a place without such gentle light. Elias stood, approaching but keeping his distance, his old boots thumping softly on the floor. "Different from where you're from?" he asked, curiosity lacing his tone, fingers tapping the window frame. She turned her head, silver eyes meeting his briefly, deep as pools reflecting an endless sky. "Where no light like this," she said slowly, each word chosen with care. "Only darkness and stars." Elias nodded, holding back the flood of questions. Her home a frozen planet? A drifting ship? A dimension beyond his grasp? But he sensed the fragility in her voice and knew pressing her would only close her off. He decided she could stay, at least until her wound healed. "You can stay here," he said, moving to the small kitchen to brew coffee, the old copper kettle hissing steadily. "Until you're better." Lira watched him, her silver eyes flickering with surprise, but she didn't protest. She nodded, then returned to the window, as if the dawn's light were her only anchor amid the nightmare that brought her here. In the days that followed, Elias taught her the simplest parts of his life, things he'd taken for granted but were utterly foreign to her. One morning, he cooked a basic potato soup, its aroma of tubers and salt pork filling the tight space. He set a steaming bowl on the table, handing her an old, tarnished metal spoon. "Eat," he said, sitting across from her. Lira stared at the soup, then the spoon, her small hands fumbling with it like an artifact from another age. She dipped her fingers into the bowl, recoiling as the heat stung, a faint hiss escaping her lips. Elias chuckled, a dry but warm sound, the first in months. "Not like that," he said, lifting his spoon to demonstrate. "Use this." She watched, silver eyes gleaming with curiosity, then mimicked him, awkwardly scooping soup and bringing it to her mouth. As the warmth touched her tongue, her shoulders eased, a small sound, almost a contented sigh, slipping from her throat. "It's warm," she whispered, voice thick with wonder. Elias smiled, leaning back. "Yeah, that's the point." Warm seemed to hold special meaning for her, and he noticed she repeated it whenever she felt comfort, the soup, the fireplace, the blanket he gave her each night. She learned fast, though her clumsiness often made Elias laugh. Once, he showed her how to crack eggs for breakfast, handing her a small chicken egg and guiding her to tap it lightly on the table's edge. "Gentle," he cautioned, but Lira, with uncanny strength in her delicate hands, smashed it too hard, yolk and white splattering across the table and his shirt. Elias froze, then burst into laughter, the sound echoing in the cabin. Planning an egg explosion? He teased, wiping his hands on his coat. Lira looked at him, then her sticky fingers, her silver eyes twinkling with curiosity rather than embarrassment. I'm not used to it, she said, her soft voice carrying a hint of playfulness. Slowly, Lira opened up, though an invisible distance lingered. She began asking questions about the trees outside, the birdsong at dawn, the sounds from Elias's old radio. One afternoon, he turned it on, a slow jazz tune filling the air with low, lilting notes. Lira stood still, hands limp, listening as if the sound were alive. This sound, does it live? She asked, awe in her voice, stepping closer to the radio as if to touch it. Elias grinned, leaning back, tapping the rhythm. You could say that. It makes humans feel alive. Like it? She tilted her head, pondering, then nodded faintly. It's warm, she said, and Elias realized warm wasn't just heat, it was her word for safety, something she'd lacked for too long. Not every moment was light. At night, Elias often found Lira by the window, bare feet tucked up, silver eyes fixed on the starry sky. Once, he saw her trace an invisible pattern on the glass, then freeze, her hand trembling as if brushing a painful memory. He didn't pry, unwilling to breach the grief she hid. But he knew she sought something, or someone, lost to her. One night, as moonlight flooded through, painting her face in light and shadow, Elias watched from the room's edge. Can't sleep? He asked softly, keeping his voice low. She turned, silver eyes glinting in the dark. Look, she said, pointing skyward. They call me. Elias joined her, leaning on the frame, following her gaze. The stars shone, cold and distant, eternal lanterns. Who's calling? He asked, though he half guessed. Lira fell silent, her hand dropping, then whispered. The one's gone. Her voice cracked despite her restraint, and Elias felt a pang, not his, but an echo of her loss he could only imagine. You don't have to be alone, he said, firmer than he felt. Not here. Lira searched his eyes, her silver gaze seeking something, and after a moment, she nodded faintly, almost imperceptibly. It was a first step, small but vital, in the bond forming between a solitary human and a lost soul from the stars. The days in Elias's small cabin took on a new rhythm, a strange harmony of his routines and Lira's quiet, vibrant presence. Each morning, sunlight pierced the thin curtains, spilling over the scratched floor, and Elias awoke to the scent of coffee brewing in his old copper kettle, mingling with Lira's soft footsteps as she moved about. She'd grown accustomed to the space. Her small hands no longer clutched her tattered cloak when he neared, and her silver eyes now held not just suspicion but curiosity and warmth. Yet Elias knew beneath her adaptation lay a deep void she hadn't let him touch. One evening, as moonlight poured through the window, cloaking the room in cold silver, Elias sat in his armchair, an old astronomy book in hand, pulled from a dusty pile in the corner. The fire crackled steadily, its warmth spreading, softening the winter night's edge outside. Lira sat by the window, bare feet tucked on the sill, arms around her knees, silver eyes riveted to the starry sky. Moonlight bathed her face, illuminating the pulsing patterns on her violet skin, brighter now, as if responding to the distant stars. Elias watched from the corner, his book lowering, the text forgotten. Something in her stillness, almost anguished, made him unable to ignore it any longer. Want to talk about them? He asked softly, voice low and gentle, fearing to shatter their fragile space. Lira didn't stir at first, her eyes locked on the stars, as if they were the last pieces of a tale she couldn't let go. After a long silence, she turned, silver hair shimmering over her shoulders, her gaze meeting his. I wasn't born to be alone, she said, her tone deep and distant, each word drawn from a well within her soul. Elias set the book down, leaning back, listening without interruption, sensing the weight of what was to come. She took a shaky breath, its tremble blending with the wind's whistle through the window cracks. My people were wanderers, she began, her small hand tracing an invisible pattern on the glass, slender fingers quivering as if sketching memories. We traveled the stars, never staying long. We sought something greater, light, knowledge, a place to call home. Her voice faded, each word a small cut into her heart. We lived on vast ships, soaring between galaxies, where darkness was our only companion. No sun, no days, just stars to guide us. Elias leaned forward, hands clasped, eyes unwavering. He pictured a race adrift in the void, colossal ships gliding through nebulae, plasma engines lighting the endless black. Sounds like a dream, he said quietly, awe in his voice. Lira nodded, but her eyes darkened, silver pools clouded over. It was, until it broke. She paused, her hand dropping, clutching the edge of the gray wool sweater Elias had given her days ago, worn and oversized on her frail frame. A war came, she continued, her voice breaking despite her efforts. Not ours. An enemy from afar, hunters of resources, destroyers of all in their path. They found us among the stars, and they didn't stop. Elias's chest tightened, imagining ships torn apart in space, explosions flaring in the dark, the silent screams of a people unable to resist. I was sent away, Lira said, eyes squeezing shut, reliving that moment. A small ship, just for one. They, my family, said I had to live, to carry our memories. I didn't want to go, but they gave me no choice. A silver droplet slid from her eye, not a tear, but a liquid metal, falling to the floor in a faint gleam before vanishing. When I returned, there was nothing. No ships, no people, nothing. Just me, and the wrecked craft that brought me here. Elias sat silent, the room's air growing heavy, pressing on his shoulders. He'd never lost a family. He never truly had one to lose, but he knew emptiness, the feeling of staring into a void with nothing left to return to. That's why you were in the forest, he whispered, voice hoarse. Looking for them. Lira nodded, gripping the sweater until he heard it tear faintly. I thought if I followed the stars long enough, I'd find them. A signal, a trace, anything. But there's no home to go back to. He stood, stepping to her side, leaning on the window frame, inches away. Moonlight lit his face, etching the lines of his lonely years. Then why not build a new one? He said, voice steadier than he felt, fingers tapping the sill to hide his unease. Lira turned to him, silver eyes wide, disbelief in her gaze. Build a new one? She echoed, hesitant, the idea alien to her. Elias shrugged, keeping his tone casual despite his racing heart. I don't know much about space travel or lost civilizations, but I know this, you don't have to be alone. Not here. He glanced at the sky, stars cold and distant, then back at her. Earth isn't your galaxy, but it could be home, if you want. Lira stared at him, her silver eyes searching his, weighing his words for truth or fleeting promise. You'd keep me here? She whispered, soft but edged with challenge. Elias chuckled, a dry, warm sound. Sounds like I'm kidnapping you. But if you want to stay, stay. I won't chase you off. She fell silent, hands relaxing on her knees, then leaned closer, just a fraction, but enough for him to feel a strange warmth from her, not human heat, but a faint energy radiating outward. It was the smallest gesture, yet to Elias, it spoke volumes. He couldn't promise to find her family, he couldn't. But he could offer her a place to rest, to heal, maybe to start anew. That night, as Lira gazed at the sky again, Elias stood beside her, wordless. Stars shone down, cold and far, but in this tiny cabin, a new light flickered, not from the heavens, but from a human's compassion and a survivor's resilience from the cosmos. Winter crept slowly through the remote forest, each day bringing harsh cold that seeped through the cabin's wooden cracks. Yet inside, the space glowed warmer than ever, not just from the fire's crackle but from Lira, a star-born being now woven into Elias's life. At first, she'd been a silent shadow, moving cautiously, silver eyes wary, hands clutching her cloak as if fearing abduction. Now she transformed, not a desperate wanderer, but a companion, a soul learning to anchor herself in this world. Elias awoke each morning to a fresh rhythm. He drew back the thin curtain, letting winter's pale light flood in, illuminating the scratched floor and humble belongings, the dusty table, the sofa with its gray-green blanket where Lira slept. He brewed coffee in his old copper kettle, its steady hiss blending with the fire's wood smoke and the faint herbal scent of tea Lira had learned to make. She rose before him, bare feet padding softly, small hands exploring with ceaseless wonder, from the radio's jazz tunes to the astronomy books strewn across the table. She no longer asked, "Does it live?" as she once had, but her silver eyes still sparkled with each discovery. One morning, Elias entered the kitchen and stopped, surprised to see Lira by the fire, stirring a pot of potato soup with a wooden spoon. The aroma of tubers and salt pork wafted up, imperfect but enough to halt him. "What are you doing?" he asked, a hint of astonishment in his voice, leaning on the doorframe. Lira turned, silver hair glinting in the window's light, her silver eyes meeting his with a trace of pride. "Soup," she said simply, her melodic voice steadier now. "I learned from you." Elias stepped closer, peering in. The soup was too thick, some potatoes undercooked, but he couldn't hold back a grin. "Not bad," he said, patting her shoulder, feeling her frail frame no longer tremble as it once did. "You're getting there." Lira learned swiftly, not just cooking but the small tasks of the cabin. Elias taught her to stack firewood by the hearth, to split logs with an axe, though he had to stop her when she snapped a large piece in half with her bare hands' strange strength, leaving him both awed and amused. "Easy, Lira," he said, shaking his head. "We don't need to clear the forest in a day." She tilted her head, silver eyes twinkling, then nodded, as if committing his words to memory. She learned to mend clothes, stitching the holes in the gray sweater he'd given her with clumsy but earnest threads. Each task completed, she'd look at him, silent, her gaze asking, "Did I do it right?" Gradually, Lira left her mark on the cabin. She brewed 2 cups of tea each night, setting one by Elias unprompted, the herbal scent mingling with wood smoke. She kept the radio on when she knew he liked music while reading, jazz notes a backdrop to quiet evenings. She no longer sat alone by the window at night but faced him on the sofa, bare feet tucked up, cradling her tea, silver eyes watching him with an ease he'd never seen before. Elias realized he'd changed too, no longer reading in total silence, no longer moving through the cabin oblivious to another's presence. He'd grown used to her soft steps, her hummed alien melodies, the odd warmth she brought, not physical, but existential. Not every moment was serene. One night, as snow fell thick outside, Elias woke to a faint sound, a soft moan from the sofa. Sitting up, rubbing his eyes, he saw Lira curled in her blanket, hands clutching her head, silver eyes wide at the ceiling. He approached, kneeling beside her, voice rough with sleep. "Lira, what's wrong?" She didn't answer at first, breaths rapid, then whispered, "I saw them, in dreams. They call me, but I can't go." Elias stayed quiet, a pang in his chest, her pain, not his. He rested a hand on her shoulder, gentle but firm. "You don't have to go anywhere," he said. "You're here with me." She looked at him, silver eyes shimmering in the dark, and after a beat nodded, her small hand touching his, cold yet conveying trust he felt deeply. From that night, her nightmares lessened, her sleep deepening, sometimes letting the blanket slip to reveal a peaceful face Elias hadn't seen before. One winter afternoon, as snow fell lightly, Elias took Lira outside. He wrapped a wool scarf around her neck, muttering, "You'll freeze," though he knew she didn't feel cold like humans. She stepped barefoot onto the thin snow, small hands catching melting flakes, silver eyes wide with wonder. "It's light," she said, her melodic voice ringing in the white expanse. Elias stood on the porch, hands in his coat pockets, watching with a faint smile. "Yeah, but don't stay out too long, or I'll have to drag you in." She turned, silver hair sparkling in the dim sun, and for the first time, smiled, a small, fleeting curve, but enough to quicken Elias's pulse. "You always do that," she said, soft but certain. "Give without asking." Elias shrugged, awkward, rubbing his neck. "Just what you do." She shook her head, stepping closer, leaving tiny prints in the snow. "Not everyone does." They stood amid the snowy field, Elias's breath fogging the air, Lira's not. Her body didn't exhale like a human's, yet her presence warmed in its own way. You've changed me, he said, voice rough, gazing outward. I thought I didn't need anyone. But now. He trailed off, unsure how to finish. Lira tilted her head, silver eyes gleaming. I changed too, she said. Because of you. That winter, Lira stopped gazing at the sky with sorrow. She stayed, not just in the cabin, but in Elias's life, making it a true home, not by blood, but by companionship and trust. Elias knew he hadn't just saved her, she'd saved him, from the solitude he'd once clung to like armor.